Thanks for being here to support our students. We'll get started in one more minute. We're going to go ahead and get started with some announcements before we get to our student and trainee presentations. Good to see everybody. Welcome to our Wall Family Speaker Series in Health, Spirituality, and Religion. Once a year, we aim to have presentations from students and trainees about their scholarly work at the intersection of medicine and religion. This is in part to highlight the work that's being done here and also to help our colleagues prepare for the Conference on Medicine and Religion, where they will be presenting their scholarly work. So we have a great lineup today. Before I go ahead and introduce our students, I just have a couple announcements. So if you are a branch medical student or know of a branch medical student, we have openings for next year. We're taking applications for our student fellows in the program on health, spirituality, and religion. And so our student fellows have their own program of formation. They help run the program. They help pick speakers if they want to. We help mentor them and support their scholarly work. So if you're interested in being a health, spirituality, and religion program student fellow and you're a branch student, you have questions, you can reach out to me or Adam or any of the current student fellows. We ask for a statement of interest and a CV to be forwarded to me or to Adam. Also for our branch students, we are hosting our non-clinical elective in medicine, spirituality, and religion. It's going to run April 14th through the 25th. It's a great elective. It's a way to read, have small group discussions with several faculty, and to discuss topics related to whole person care and the importance of the body, the role of prayer, the neurobiology of meditation, the topic of spiritual distress, and the intersection of science and religion, and much more. If you're interested or questions, please see me or Adam. So next month for our Wall Family Speaker Series, we're going to be hosting Dr. Matthew Loftus. So Matthew lives with his family in East Africa, where he's been teaching and practicing family medicine since 2015. And his talk will tell his story about how his faith has shaped his vocational work in global medical missions. And he describes his work as a long obedience in the same direction. So Dr. Loftus has written for several publications, including the New York Times, Mere Orthodoxy, and First Things. And his talk is going to be April 11th from noon to 1. Also save the date for our Wall Family Speaker Series in May. We're going to be hosting Dr. Brewer Eberly. Brewer is a family medicine physician in North Carolina, and he practices direct primary care. He's also associated with the Duke Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative. And Brewer's talk is titled Searching Souls Among the Healers. And his talk will discuss what it might mean to find ourselves caught up in counter-formational communities and practices that retell the story of good medicine. So his talk is going to be May 13th from 12 to 1. Also, if interested, I'll be giving a talk this Saturday afternoon and evening at St. Thomas the Apostle in Ann Arbor, titled Physician Conscience. What is it and why do we care? It's going to be part of a Rose Mass for healthcare professionals, and it starts around 4:30. Please see me for details. All right, now on to the main event. So each year, the annual Conference of Medicine and Religion is held across the country and showcases academic work from actually across the world, from medical students and physicians and healthcare workers on the intersection of medicine, spirituality, and religion. This year's conference is going to be held in California and is hosted by Loma Linda University this year. It's going to run April 7th through 9th. So several of our student fellows in our program on health, spirituality, and religion have had work accepted to be presented at this conference, and some of them will be presenting today. And we're thankful for our gift of funds to be able to support our fellows travel to this conference to present their work and to engage with other scholars in this space. So today, 3 of our colleagues will be presenting, 2 of our student fellows and 1 of our former student fellows, and we're really appreciative of you being here to support them. So each of them will present for about 12 to 15 minutes with a few minutes for comments or questions at the end. And they will be introducing themselves, the title of their presentation, and presenting, and then I will moderate the Q&A. Any feedback that you have, again, because this is like their practice session for the conference, is really, really appreciated. So first up, I'm going to introduce Anjola. Anjola is one of our student fellows, and he's going to kick us off. Anjola, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dr. Collier, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm Anjola Onadipe. I'm one of the fourth year medical students and one of the health, spirituality, and religion fellows this year. I'll be starting residency training this summer in combined internal medicine and pediatrics at the University of Cincinnati and Cincinnati Children's Hospital. The title of my presentation today is called Transhumanism and the Technocratic Paradigm, Connecting Environmental Ethics and Bioethics through Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick. All right. Does that look all good? Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So again, the title is called Transhumanism and the Technocratic Paradigm, Connecting Environmental Ethics and Bioethics through Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. So in his 2005 book, The Singularity is Near, Ray Kurzweil, who is a highly regarded inventor and futurist, predicted that humans will evolve into a post-human state by harnessing the tools of genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics. Kurzweil calls this post-human state the singularity, and it refers to a future period where human life is irreversibly transformed by integration with technology. Kurzweil envisions a future in which the human body is enhanced by machines to the point that we become something other than human. For example, something akin to a cyborg. This vision posed by Kurzweil is one of the many visions of transhumanism. Transhumanism is a wide-ranging philosophical and technoscientific movement that desires to enhance the human body far beyond typical human limits in intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. Transhumanism seeks an evolution of humankind through quasi-religious goals like indefinite life extension and achieving a transcendent and invisible post-human state. In 2024, Kurzweil released The Singularity is Nearer, which is the sequel to his 2005 book, and he cites things like the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence and its ability to be integrated with the human body. And while aspects of transhumanism may seem like science fiction, the rapid evolution of technology shows us that a transhumanist reality is more possible than we might think. For example, AI-powered brain-computer interfaces have been developed for therapeutic purposes, such as through Elon Musk's company Neuralink. But as technologies like this accelerate, they can easily be co-opted into a transhumanist vision. I contend that transhumanism is a topic that warrants more attention from healthcare practitioners and bioethicists. And this is because the biomedical professions have the relevant expertise on the human body to achieve a transhumanist vision. And it's likely that we will see efforts by transhumanist leaders to converge a transhumanist vision to the profession of medicine. Consequently, robust ethical frameworks within and outside of medicine are urgently needed to decipher how to engage with the transhumanist movement as it grows. In this presentation, I will highlight how Pope Francis's encyclical letter titled Laudato Si on care for our common home can be instructive in the discourse on transhumanism as it helps us connect environmental ethics and bioethics. So Laudato Si is a 2015 encyclical letter, which is also available in book form, written by Pope Francis. And it is a sweeping commentary on our global environmental crisis, including climate change, loss of biodiversity, and the depletion of natural resources such as water. In the Catholic Church, encyclical letters are pastoral letters written by the Pope to the Church regarding Catholic teaching. However, some encyclicals, including Laudato Si, are written for a broader audience than just the Church. And indeed, Laudato Si received significant praise as well as some critique from outside the Catholic Church, but with many scientists, world leaders, and non-Catholic religious organizations praising it for its honest assessment on our environmental crisis and its call to change our ways of life to have better stewardship towards the earth. Francis went beyond merely describing our environmental crisis, but additionally assessed the root causes such as over-industrialization and consumerism, and offered both theoretical and concrete ways to address these issues. So, what does a decade-old writing from the Pope about our ecological crisis have to do with transhumanism? I want to highlight how what Pope Francis describes as the technocratic paradigm is at the root of both our environmental crisis and the transhumanist movement. From there, I hope to show how some of the solutions Francis proposes to address our ecological crisis can be translated to help clinicians and bioethicists think through transhumanism. So in Laudato Si, Pope Francis laments what he calls the technocratic paradigm. This paradigm can be described as a worldview in which societal progress is predicated on technological progress. Technological innovation in and of itself becomes a moral imperative, superseding other moral considerations such as doing good, promoting justice, and upholding human dignity. An example of the technocratic paradigm is seen in the decimation of the Amazon rainforest for the sake of financial gain and expanding consumer interests in wealthier nations and at the expense of the people who inhabit the Amazon. Francis discusses how one of the roots of our environmental crisis is that we've grown to see nature as merely a resource to be extracted from and something to be instrumentalized, as opposed to seeing nature as something with some sort of intrinsic value in and of itself. In short, the technocratic paradigm represents a nihilistic way of seeing nature as without intrinsic value and then commodifying nature while side-skirting ethical implications such as environmental degradation. So shifting gears to transhumanism, I want to take a brief look at the words of one of transhumanism's foremost proponents, Max More. In a foundational essay on transhumanism, he described the goal of transhumanism saying, quote, "Our goal is not God. It is the continuation of the process of improvement and transformation of ourselves into ever higher forms. We will outgrow our current interests, bodies, minds, and forms of social organization. This process of expansion and transcendence is the fountainhead of transhumanist meaningfulness." So I think it's worth noting here that what gives the body meaning in a transhumanist philosophy is not something intrinsic to our humanity, but rather meaning is garnered through our ability to utilize technology to alter the body to reach some post-human state. Rather than technology being a tool to promote the dignity and flourishing of people, technological progress in and of itself is the end goal of transhumanism. When we lose a sense of the intrinsic significance of the human body, we may end up dehumanizing it, just like how when we lose a sense of the intrinsic significance of the earth, we may end up degrading it. One of the ways transhumanism can be dehumanizing is that it can promote a kind of normative homogeneity by focusing on achieving a singular idealized state of the human body. This leads to valuing some human qualities and diminishing others. Furthermore, it can be dehumanizing by promoting an ableist mindset by seeing the only approach to human limitation and disability as to eliminate it. Transhumanism is connected to the technocratic paradigm because they both represent a way of viewing the world in which technological control becomes an end goal in and of itself, which supersedes other ethical and moral considerations. Consequently, I think some of the responses Pope Francis proposed to the technocratic paradigm in Laudato Si with regards to our ecological crisis can be instructive in our discourse about the ethics of transhumanism. And in these last few minutes, I will point out just two of them. The first is that a lesson that we can glean from Laudato Si is that technological progress can serve good ends, but technological progress should not be an end goal in and of itself. In Laudato Si, Francis said the following: "It is right to rejoice in technological advances and to be excited by the immense possibilities which they continue to open up before us, for science and technology are wonderful products of a God-given human creativity. Technoscience, when well directed, can produce important means of improving quality of human life, from useful domestic appliances to great transportation systems, bridges, buildings, and public spaces." So here we see that Pope Francis is no Luddite. As technology evolves, we should have an open posture and embrace it. However, he laments how technological progress is automatically seen as a moral good rather than appraising the end goals of our technological innovations. And notice how in this quote he uses the qualifier of when it's well directed. And what Francis is getting at is that technology should be directed by honorable pursuits, such as promoting the common good and uplifting the poor and disenfranchised in society. A second lesson from Laudato Si is that we should see all of creation as a gift, whether it's the trees, human beings, and non-human animals. Francis's primary response to our ecological crisis is something akin to an ecological conversion in which we change from seeing nature as merely objects for human consumption, commodification, and control, and instead see nature as a gift to be received with awe and wonder. The following quote describes this. If we approach nature and the environment without this openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs. By contrast, if we feel intimately united with all that exists, then sobriety and care will well up spontaneously. The poverty and austerity of St. Francis of Assisi were no mere veneer of asceticism, but something much more radical, a refusal to turn reality into an object simply to be used and controlled. So here Francis calls us to see nature with wonder. And if we apply this ethic to biomedicine, it calls us to see fellow human beings first and foremost as complex creatures with immense worth, rather than merely machines to be manipulated. In contemporary medicine, the body can often be treated as a machine in a very reductionistic approach. And now, this metaphor of the body as a machine is indeed helpful as we understand the body. But as with all metaphors, it's important to remember that it is indeed a metaphor and not reality. Transhumanism, however, takes this metaphor and aims to turn it into a reality. Ironically, in an attempt to improve humanity, transhumanism strips away our humanity by reducing our existence to meaningless matter and motion. In the process, people become less like subjects and more like objects. As I conclude, just a few points I want to reiterate. I think transhumanism is an important bioethical topic. Second, spiritual and religious traditions can be sources of ethical reflections on bioethical topics. And I think Laudato Si is an example of one such source of reflection. And lastly, Laudato Si helps us connect environmental ethics and bioethics through the description of the technocratic paradigm. And actually, biomedical ethics and environmental ethics have been historically linked. The term bioethics used to refer to both ecology and biomedicine before the fields of environmental ethics and biomedical ethics became distinct. And so this spring marks the 10th anniversary of the release of Laudato Si. And this work has had an impact on the environmental movement over the last decade. And I hope that it can be instructive for those of us in biomedicine as well. Thank you for listening, and I'll pass it back to Dr. Collier.
Thanks, Anjola. That was great. And again, just to give some props to Anjola. Anjola also is one of the ethics program fellows also, and has done a lot of really cool work at the intersection both of medical ethics and religion and theology, and has been shown a growth mindset for reaching into a text that even lies outside of his specific tradition as a non-Catholic engaging Laudato Si. So wonderful to see. So we have a couple questions. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Adriana Madrina Moran. Adriana, good to see you.
Hi, thank you so much. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Adriana, we can hear you. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Anjola, congratulations. This is beautiful work. I want to just make a comment from first of all, who I am. I am neuroscience researcher at the Michigan Medicine. I am an MD PhD in neuroscience, and I have been invited to participate on the elective that we're going to have in April, and I'm extremely excited about it, and I'm so happy to find that we have this group. And I am also now part of spiritual care at the hospital. That's why I'm here. So I'm the weird lady that nobody has seen before. That's me. So that my comment is going to come more from my point of view of being a teacher for a long time and being a public speaker for a long time. I think your presentation is beautiful. I can tell you from the second half was perfect. The first half, you can take this or leave it. You don't need to change it if you're not comfortable with it. But there were so many words that require a dictionary that I would suggest, if you can simplify them a little bit, that will be wonderful. And never be afraid of it. Because one of the first rules of public speaking is that anytime that you hear somebody walk out of a talk and say, that was awesome, the first thing that happened was that they were able to connect, the audience was able to connect their previous experience and their previous knowledge to what the speaker was saying. So I really enjoy your message, but at the beginning, I was more concerned about all the terms that were not in my routine speech than I was on the content. So let's start with the fact that you're talking about transhumanism, which is a very big word, literally big word, right? It's long, and it's also a big word in the sense that it's not in the regular speech of most people. And if you're going to go into the conference, you're going to have a lot of physicians, but you're also going to have nurses. You're going to have all kinds of health professionals and people who have never heard these words. So I will suggest keep the ones that are fundamentally important. You cannot change that word. But if there are other words that you can find a simpler way to express the same idea, don't be afraid of it. People are actually going to like it more, because when you are in a conference, people are tired. They're walking by the posters. They're hearing one conference after another after another. People get tired. So when you bring something that is easy to digest, your message will hit home, and your message hits home. But I also had to search what Laudato Si meant as translation from the Latin, and it means praise be. So it will be good to tell people it means praise be. And it means praise be, meaning praise be the environment, praise be the body, praise be God, right? So even that, it's adding to the collection of words that a lot of people don't use in their normal speech. So since you have such a short period of time, I would suggest make it as digestible as possible, because your message is beautiful. So that's what I had to say.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that feedback. And yeah, it's just funny, like after working on something for a while, how easy it is to like forget like certain terms that mean something to you, like it come off differently. And so I really appreciate that, and definitely gonna take that feedback for the conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Adriana. Yeah, this is the point of this, is to workshop these presentations for our students so they know how to improve them for the conference. Thanks so much, Adriana. And then Matt.
Hey, Anjola, awesome job as always. I was kind of, as you were going through your presentation, which was excellent, learned a ton. I was thinking more about kind of a different kind of transhumanism, particularly like bioprostheses, more specifically like TAVR and putting pig valves in people and things like that. And I'm just wondering if that kind of human alteration as a form of technology outside of like the Neuralink, computer chippy, big data I'm wondering if that has any role in this discussion, and if that's something you came across.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, Matt. And I think part of it too is like how you define transhumanism, and maybe this is even something I could hone in on a little bit too. Of I think there's transhumanism in the sense of like different like procedures or things that are done, but then there's also transhumanism more as like a philosophy of way of being, that like we ought to like utterly like escape our like human condition And so I think when it comes to things like that, like prostheses and things of that nature, I think there's a way of approaching that that's like separate from like the like transhumanist philosophy of like we need to become something other than human, but is instead like we're helping this person to you know integrate into this life and society with what they have.
Any other
Well put.
questions or comments for Anjola? I'm just going to put a piece into the chat. It's one of the best pieces I've read on transhumanism by the famed Jewish philosopher, doctor, bioethicist Leon Kass. It's called Ageless Bodies, Happy Souls. And Cass talks about it's really unhelpful to talk about transhumanism around like, is this therapeutic and restorative, or is this enhancement? Because those lines oftentimes break down. Because, you know, if you think about talking like to people maybe from the disability community who, let's say I was in a group of people who had like decreased hearing and deafness, and there was a talk about transhumanism, about trying to sort of like, you know, fix deafness. And some folks in the community were like offended. They're like, there's nothing wrong with me. Don't assume that like what I have is something that needs to be fixed or restored. And so how we think about different voices within the transhumanism movement and how we think about medicine being co-opted into it is something that physicians need to be active voices on. So really appreciate this conversation. And I would point people towards Ageless Bodies, Happy Souls if you want to read more about it. So Cass talks about, instead of this enhancement, restoration, therapeutic, he talks about sort of a Aristotelian idea of like the ends, like let's think about the goal of this and like where this leads us. More so is a question about use. Thanks so much, Anjola. I cannot wait to hear this in California in a couple of weeks and get comments there also. All right, so Deb, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Let me just
go for it.
share. Okay. All right, let me just get this. All right, can you see that all right?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Dev Gingrich, and I'm a current fourth-year medical student at the University of Michigan Medical School here. I am also one of the Health, Spirituality, and Religion Fellows, and I am also a future pediatric resident at the University of California in San Francisco. So today I'd like to discuss with you my presentation on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and ecological awareness as a way of building resilience through nature's wisdom. This is the work that I'll be presenting at the Conference on Medicine and Religion this coming April. So in this presentation, I hope to use the following questions to guide us through an exploration of the interrelationships between early life trauma, climate change, and our current climate crisis, which feels very pertinent to Anjola's conversation as well as exploring spirituality and building resilience. So the questions I'd like to ask are, how can a connection with nature foster resilience in our youngest and most vulnerable patients? And how does harm to our planet reflect the trauma that is often faced by these same patients? And finally, how can cultivating a spiritual relationship with nature open up pathways of healing for both ourselves, our patients, and our planet? So with all this in mind, a brief agenda for today's talk, I wanted to cover some background information on ACEs, discuss the climate crisis and its implications on human health, and briefly touch on positive or beneficial childhood experiences and building resilience in children and adolescents, and then move into discussion of how we can begin to cultivate an ecological awareness and form new relationships with our environment through the framework of a two-eyed seeing approach, and provide these solutions for a daily practice of developing spiritual connection to nature. So the concept of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs as they're often referred to, was first discussed in a 1998 Kaiser Permanente and CDC study that linked how early trauma in life had significant impacts on the development of numerous psychological and physical health issues and poor health behaviors. Since that study was published, countless others have supported these findings and provided strong evidence for the graded and dose-dependent effects of ACEs on these health outcomes, and also highlighted the strong prevalence of ACEs in our current population, with an estimated 50% of the population having at least one ACE and close to 25 or 30% of the population experiencing 3 or greater. And in some of these graphics, these show the traditional 10 ACEs as they were defined, many of them related to household dysfunction. And then these are some of the negative health behaviors and physical and mental health outcomes, ranging from heart disease, various types of cancer, depression, and suicidality. So I'd like to parallel this, though, with our growing climate crisis and the role that climate change plays in human health. We've seen this very clearly in recent history with tropical storms Helene and Milton this past year, the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles, and numerous other extreme weather events that we've experienced. There are increasing threats to our health and our natural and built environments. These cycles of rising temperatures, drought, extreme weather put already vulnerable populations in greater danger, and there are numerous health outcomes that are related to this. This highlights just a few of them, anywhere ranging from worsening pre-existing conditions to worsening heat-related injury and illness. And I think one of the things that I'd really like to highlight here too is the mental health implications of climate change on our health related to depression, stress, and strains on our social relationships. And so to counterbalance some of this, step a little bit back from the doom and gloom of these crises, I think it's really important to highlight that both patients and ecosystems are living beings in flux. And this is really where the element of resilience can take place and prominence. So resilience is defined as the ability to withstand, adapt to, and recover from adverse events. And what I think is particularly important in this is that this is not an inherent or an intrinsic feature of any one individual, but this is something that can be cultivated. A recent study coming out from the American Academy of Pediatrics described this as a complex interplay between a child's genetics, natural and temperament, knowledge and skills, past experiences, social supports, and culture and societal resources. This is incredibly far-reaching, and there are many points of intervention in this. And I'd also like to play on the concept of biomimicry, which is really just how humans and kind of our own systems reflect those of the natural world. And so, for example, I think one of the first is the concept of a controlled burn, or even how fires can clear destructive understory in forests and allow them to grow back more full and healthier for the future. Similarly, droughts allow trees to increase their biomass underground, relate to other trees, and utilize resources in a shared way and grow back stronger to be able to withstand future droughts. And so when we look at current approaches for how we foster resilience in patients and how to mitigate adverse childhood experiences and just build resilience in general, there's really three realms that this is conceived of. The first being on the individual level, the second being on the relationship level, primarily between children and their parents, but as well as their family unit, and then the third being in their environment. This is often conceived of the home environment, perhaps the school environment, but I argue that this can be expanded even further to the natural environment as well. And I think a particularly helpful quote here was that a child's resilience can flourish in an ecosystem that proactively develops resilient coping. And so again, this highlights the fact that these are systems in flux and that there are interventions that can be made. And so part of the modifiable elements for building resilience in children are highlighted here. I think two of particular importance are the concept of self-care skills and household routines, and the utility of taking care of oneself, but also building rituals and routines and daily practices that can foster resilience. And the second is better understanding of one's own trauma. And this is where that parallel between the trauma inflicted on our natural world and the trauma that individuals may have experienced in their own upbringing can better help understand these parallels and the trauma that has been experienced by both systems. And so with this, I sort of argue that there needs to be a larger relationship shift in how we conceive of our relationship with our natural environment. And so historically, as I think Anjola has actually very beautifully described, there's been a history of extraction from the environment, and that we need to dominate this space, and that it is utilized for our own financial or political gains rather than a different type of relationship. And I think this is really where the concept of an ecological awareness can take shape, where we find reciprocity in our actions and use this connection that will lead us to build the desire to protect our natural environment. And so thinking about this in the context of ACEs, of how this ecological awareness can mitigate the effects of ACEs, I really think that there are sort of three realms that we can do this. And this is the idea of promoting resilience through the interconnection of those environmental factors alongside the individual and relationship factors, and blending all three of these through an increased relationship with nature and the way that we engage with this. And the second would be to build this connection to a place and have this more rooted sense of belonging as a primary mitigator. The third being a cultivation of individual relationships with nature as this daily regulator. And this really references that concept of ritual and routine. This is a photo of one of my former students. I used to be a garden manager, and this is, I think, a prime example of these moments of developing that connection with nature, but really experiencing this in a place-based and seasonality-based place. The student is smelling one of the first daffodils of the season that really marks this passage into spring, but this is also a bulb that he helped plant the earlier fall, and it's taking these moments and building these rituals to self-regulate and to build that resilience. And so to back this up a little bit further, there's been a lot of studies that actually highlight how these nature-based solutions, this can, sometimes called ecotherapy. This includes something like forest bathing, which is pictured here, various forms of ecotherapy, just different ways of interacting with nature. And it has shown that contact with nature has numerous health benefits, from reducing stress to improving mental health and cognitive functioning. And it is currently being used in therapeutic interventions to treat adults and children with depression, anxiety, and ADHD. However, I think what's sort of lacking here is that we're often addressing the end effects of early trauma. We're treating the depression, the anxiety, these different sort of downstream effects. But how can we develop skills to build more resilient children and build these skills earlier to help mitigate against the downstream effects of ACEs? This also leads to, this was a systematic review that was done by Dr. Anjola and their team that compiled 2 decades worth of quantitative and qualitative studies looking at nature connectedness and child well-being. And it showed, clear psychological, physical, and social well-being benefits to children by engaging with nature. But I think one of the biggest things here was that actually it was not just filling out surveys and sort of seeing what these end effects were, but it was really children's own self-recognition of how their relationship with nature could improve their well-being and foster this social responsibility and connection to this larger community. But also that their knowledge of these positive interactions with nature could improve their well-being. And this was a resource that they could use when they needed it, that this was something that they were building within themselves and could rely on in the future when they experienced times of distress. One of my favorite quotes from this was from a child who said, "I just think about the nature and everything that is related to it, and this gives me a positive spirit." And so I think this touches on this sense of interconnectedness and also starts to evoke this other sense of spirit, of that there is something else that perhaps cannot be fully captured through looking only at neurobiology, looking only at anxiety and depression scores, and that we really need something else to sort of booster this and explain what's going on. So I bring to you like a third study that really highlights potential solutions for this. And this was actually the concept of park prescription. So this was done by Dr. Razani. She's a pediatrician in Oakland, California, who provided park prescriptions to under-resourced children. And this was a 3-month study that it showed that resilience scores improved with each 1-day increase in weekly park visits on these children's self-reports. And these were some of the findings from the study, and it did explain that reduction in stress did explain part of the relationship between this visitation to parks and improved resilience, but it didn't explain the whole story. And so I think this opens the door for how does daily practice and more of a regular connection with nature improve resilience, but also what else is there? It's not just stress reduction that is improving resilience. It's not just that connection to nature. There's something else that I think needs to be explored. So this really brings me to this next idea of how to mobilize these ideas into a daily practice. And so I think the best way to sort of conceive of this is the concept of Antepartum, or this 2-eyed seeing approach. And so this is a guiding principle. It was introduced into the academic community in the early 21st century by McMack elders Albert and Modena Marshall, alongside Dr. Cheryl Bartlett in Nova Scotia, Canada. And this provides a framework to guide many aspects of Indigenous health scholarship. And this is used as a way of really to conceive of blending traditional Indigenous wisdom with Western ideologies and exploring this different type of health scholarship. I won't go through all of this, but there's been some, recent studies that have really distilled some of the 7 categories of meaning in this approach. And I think 3 of particular relevance to this conversation. The first being a responsibility to the greater good, which really evokes this idea of calling for use of all capacities, gifts, and actions to leave the world a better place. I think this evokes, similar concepts that we see in other religious ideologies, whether that's tikkun olam or, sort of other concepts of what do you owe or what is your responsibility to the larger world. The next I'd like to bring up is the concept of spirit. And I think this is really what we're sort of touching on through some of these studies, and that maybe cannot be fully captured in some of the studies that we've discussed. And it's really the idea that there is spirit in everything, and it is essential for a complete person to have this interaction of body, mind, soul, and spirit with all aspects of nature. And the third is that humans are part of ecosystems. Human health requires this balance and integrity between people and global ecosystems that surround them. And it's not that we are separate from nature, but we are part of nature. We are part of this ecosystem, and we are in a constant dialogue with our natural environment. And so in using this approach, I invite you to explore a more personal and expansive view of what this bidirectional relationship can look like through cultivating an intimate, unique, and place-based approach. I invite you to think about what I describe as your own corner of the earth. This might be a particular part of your backyard, a specific tree in a city park, a nearby pond, or a walking trail. And I like for you just to think of this space. And how did you come to know this area? Can you imagine what it smells like? Do you know how it shifts, how it grows, and how it changes with the passing of seasons? How it makes you feel to be in this space? And what have you learned from this space? So I invite you to find these spaces and nurture these relationships. They're not arbitrary or insignificant, but they're living and breathing relationships you can cultivate and use to protect each other. So I share with you photos of the Huron River. This is my corner of the earth. This is a river that I pass every single day, whether it's my walk to the hospital or the medical school, whether it's on a run with friends, an evening walk with my partner. And this is my corner of the earth. This is where I find peace, stillness, and this is a place that I have come to care deeply about, and I have learned a lot from over the past 4 years. So to wrap things up, I hope you can take some of the following away. The first being that we are in a constant conversation with our natural environments, and we are not outside of these spaces, but within them and part of them. And the second is to use this approach of a rooted sense of spirit to build resiliency in ourselves and for our patients. And finally, that our relationship with nature is not one that is meant to be of extraction, but is one that should be of reciprocity. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Deb, and so beautiful, and love how that really was a lovely sort of synergy with Anjola's talk about Laudato Si. So we have time probably for one comment or question for Deb, and anyone who has one, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. Yeah, Adriana, go ahead.
Thank you. That was beautiful, Devin. Congratulations. And I just wanted to share that grounding is actually a practice that I've been using for a long time. And you are just reminding me how I am not using it enough. And the easiest way to, you can ground just by putting your feet on the ground, but actually in nature is so much easier and much more valuable. And for years, people belated the tree huggers, but there is nothing like hugging a tree if you want to discharge both physical energy, as in you can measure it in voltage. How much do you discharge every time that you are barefooted on the grass or when you are hugging a tree, versus if you're just doing it like on the concrete floor or something like that. So I just wanted to bring up that grounding is a very easy to do practice, and it really makes a big difference in people's lives. So thank you for bringing it up, especially when we think about children, because, we spend our lives telling children to put on shoes. And actually they may need a little bit of barefoot running around. And that will actually be very relaxing for them to prevent trauma, instead of working later with the anxiety and the consequences, as you were saying. So thank you very much for bringing it up.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. That picture of the child who had seen that daffodil come from the bulb all the way to the flower. That's so great. And children love, right, growing things and seeing things out there. We're so disconnected. So thank you so much for that lovely presentation. Again, I can't wait to hear that soon. And then last but not least, Dr. Ellery Sarosi, who is coming to us like right out of straight from clinic. So appreciate it. Ellery, I'll turn the floor over to you if you don't mind introducing yourself, the title of your presentation, and you can go for it.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristen. I'm very disappointed to have missed the presentations from Anjola and Dev. I will have to touch base with them after to hear how it went, but I'm sure y'all did great. As Dr. Collier had said, my name's Ellery. I'm one of the second-year OBGYN residents at the University of Michigan. I love my job, and I'm excited to share a paper that I actually wrote in medical school, and have just been kind of looking for the right place to share it. And this feels like the exact right venue to share it in. The piece is called Searching for a Well on the Antepartum Service. It was a reflection of my time on the maternal fetal medicine service as a medical student during my sub-I. And now that I am a resident and a resident on that service, I think it still rings true today. And just to say that the patient that I propose, her name's Sarah, and she's not so much a particular patient, but rather a summary of patients that I've encountered and cared for and gotten to know while on the antepartum service. And I'll give some context for those that maybe aren't as familiar with OBGYN. I think it's hopefully language that's understandable to the general audience. So why don't I just go ahead and get started? And I don't have slides. This is really just like a narrative piece. So it'll just be a conversation with y'all. Okay. Early morning sunlight streams through the windows of Sarah's labor and delivery room, casting a warm glow on her as she sits in a hospital bed. But there is a tension in this serene scene. The yellow nameplate outside her room signifies that she's on the antepartum service, which includes patients admitted due to unexpected obstetric complications such as severe preeclampsia or vasoprevia. Newly admitted to the ward, Sarah is alone and surrounded by a stillness that is uncharacteristic of an otherwise busy labor and delivery floor. She sits with anxious attention as our team walks in. How is she processing her unanticipated admission for preterm premature rupture of membranes at the gestational age of 23 weeks and 3 days, which is at the borderline of fetal viability? Hoping to learn more of her story, the attending physician and I pulled chairs around to the side of her bed, ready to develop a plan while reckoning with the uncertainty that will likely characterize the remainder of her pregnancy over the coming hours, days, or even weeks. After exchanging introductions, Sarah frames our conversation with a determined plea. I can't lose this baby, she tells us, revealing both her deep desire for this pregnancy and her understanding of the tenuous circumstances that she's in. She listens as we review the maternal risks associated with PPROM that occurs near or at the limits of fetal viability. These risks include intraamniotic infection, a complication that can lead to sepsis in a small subset of patients. She tells us that she understands that significant bleeding, clinical intraamniotic infection, signs of fetal distress would all indicate the need to move forward with delivery. And with that, since fetal presentation is currently in the breech position, we tell her that she would have to undergo a cesarean delivery, likely with a classical hysterotomy, a type of surgery that does carry a higher risk of bleeding and precludes any potential ability to labor in the future. Amid this deluge of information, Sarah looks at us and asks, "How long do you think I could continue to carry the pregnancy?" We share that half of patients with PPROM, or that premature preterm rupture membranes, deliver within 1 week of rupture, and most deliver within 2 to 5 weeks, durations that fall significantly short of a full term gestation of 40 weeks. Your baby's lungs are still developing, the attending physician adds. With that, if your baby is born at this gestational age, they would unfortunately experience difficulty breathing. The neonatologist would have to work to support their breathing through placement of a breathing tube. Sarah pauses to think, simultaneously feeling accompanied by the maternal fetal medicine team, but also deeply alone. She tells us that she wants to continue to watch and wait as long as it's safe. She consents to a number of different medical interventions, including latency antibiotics to prolong the pregnancy, betamethasone for fetal lung maturity, and daily fetal monitoring with a non-stress test. But beyond the medical jargon, still bathed in the warm glow of the morning sun, she tearfully tells us a deeper story. I wasn't ready to have another child during my prior pregnancies, but I am now. I've bought clothes, I've decorated the nursery, and I even picked out baby names. I can't lose this baby. The next section of the paper is entitled Drawing from Jacob's Well in Samaria. Around 2,000 years ago in the region of Samaria, another woman also faced a life-altering moment, characterized by significant vulnerability. Those familiar with the New Testament encounter her in the Gospel of John's description of the Samaritan woman at the well. On the surface, this unnamed woman is the first person in John's Gospel to whom Jesus directly and unambiguously reveals himself as the Messiah. Much was at stake for her in this messianic revelation. She had walked the same path to the well every day as long as she could remember. While providing necessary hydration, its water was also a source of spiritual sustenance, as her ancestor Jacob had given this well to her people. She had grown used to walking there in the stillness of the noonday heat, but today a man she had never seen before sat next to the well. While she went about drawing her water, he said to her, "Give me a drink." This is from the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verse 7. Realizing that this man was Judean, she was left momentarily speechless by his disregard for societal gender norms. It was not proper for a Judean man to speak with an unknown woman like herself. Second, a Judean man speaking to a Samaritan woman would have been committing a moral transgression associated with ritual contamination. While Judean and Samaritan people all worshipped the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and were all awaiting the Messiah, they disagreed about the location of their center of worship. She would have presumed that this Judean man considered Samaritan worship, her worship, unlawful, because it was not done in Jerusalem. Simply stated, she knew that he was not supposed to talk with her. She was a Samaritan, and she was a woman. She no doubt wondered what a proper response might be to this man's violation of social norms, recognizing that to speak with him would be to participate in breaking open the boundary between chosen people and rejected people, and between male and female. A quote from the author Keck and a biblical reflection on this particular biblical story. She chose to engage him. While grappling with the cultural animosity developed over centuries of Judean and Samaritan relations, she asked, "How is it that you, a Judean, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" From John chapter 4, verse 9. His response seemed to elude her question, and instead referenced her ability to procure living water, that one can drink and never be thirsty. She was skeptical of his disregard for the well gifted by their shared ancestor Jacob, but she was drawn to his description of this living water that would allow her to never be thirsty again. Drawn in beyond cultural expectations, she responded with determination, "Sir, give me this water." But he did not immediately give her living water. He told her instead to go call your husband and come back. Rather than recount her marital history, one that may have often been met with presumptions and judgment, she answered simply, "I have no husband." As her gaze locked onto his, she was stunned when he not only affirmed the validity of her response, but expanded on it by saying, "You have had 5 husbands, and the one that you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." How could he have known her story? She paused, waiting for him to add to that her current relationship with the man was unlawful, but no condemnation came. He was focused on her, not on what she had done or what had been done to her. The next section of this paper is a well of living water. Jesus and the Samaritan woman initially connected over a mutual need for water, yet ironically their thirsts were quenched without either of them having ever drinken from Jacob's well. Jesus declined the sustenance offered to him by his disciples shortly after his encounter with the Samaritan woman. And the Samaritan woman left behind her jar of water in favor of sharing the news that she had found another source of water, the living water that gushed forth from the long-awaited Messiah. While a water jar was needed to draw from Jacob's well, how did Jesus and the Samaritan woman draw from the well of living water? Well, John's gospel affirms that Jesus is the water and the bread of life. These are This is referenced in John chapter 6, verse 35, and John chapter 7, verse 37 to 38. Jesus and the woman related to each other in three ways that contributed to radical resolution of their thirst. First, they both showed the courage of vulnerable truthfulness. Jesus as a Judean man in a position of relative authority, and the Samaritan woman in a socially subordinate position, skirted the norms of their culture, not only by conversing, but also by sharing their intimate identities with each other. She shared her identity as a previously married woman, and Jesus shared his identity as Israel's Messiah. Their vulnerable truthfulness led her to set aside historical animosity and to directly engage in Jesus' belief regarding the proper site of worship. Jesus then disclosed to her, as Leander Keck states, that true worship is no longer defined by place, but as worship in spirit and truth. The historical problem of Jewish versus Samaritan worship is transformed into an eschatological encounter with the presence of God. By being vulnerable and inquiring about the proper site of worship, the Samaritan woman became an indispensable part of the larger story of salvation history. In John's gospel, she became the first person that Jesus reveals his identity to as Savior of the world. In their mutual vulnerability, Jesus and the woman both drank deeply from the spring of water welling up to eternal life. Second, Jesus and the woman treated each other's stories with respect and reverence. They saw each other as people worthy of engaging, both about basic needs such as access to water and about more personal topics, such as the Samaritan woman's marital history. Notably, as they navigated the topic of her marital history, Jesus did not presume moral failure, but received her story without evident judgment. While he stated that her current partner was not her husband, neither Jesus nor the woman indicated that her current relationship was unlawful. We have a tendency to presume so, but presuming so does import our own moral judgment into a story for which there are many possible explanations aside from immorality. The reasons for this marital history intrigues commentators, but does not concern Jesus. He detailed her marital history to convey his familiarity with her life, which in turn prompted her to ask him if he is a prophet. The focus of this passage is not judgment, but receptivity. Third, they treated each other as ends rather than means, and in this way the woman recognized her own agency. Through seeking out the Samaritan woman in her isolation in her homeland and at her well, and through acknowledging a shared need and asking her for a drink of water, Jesus recognized her as the host and as the protagonist in this story. Interestingly, while she was motivated to go tell her community about Jesus, he provided no such command and was content with having shared the good news with her. He sees her as an end, not as a means to an end. Treated as an end and not as a means, the Samaritan woman set aside the water she had drawn, instead became a disciple and evangelist, introducing her community to the long-awaited Messiah. Through embracing vulnerable truthfulness, reverence for each other's stories, and relationality, the Samaritan woman saw her physiologic thirst transformed into a thirst for eternal life. One of the final sections in this paper, which will probably be our last for our time together, is continuing the search for a well on the Antepartum Service. Much like the Samaritan woman's isolation, the stillness and solitude notable on the day we met Sarah continues to characterize her admission. As hours evolve to days and days evolve to weeks, she remains stable from an obstetric perspective, but suspended in the uncertainty for what is to come for her and her baby. Notably, she has no visitors. Although we feel compassion for her, our MFM team is unable to adequately provide the daily companionship and emotional support she's longing for. We've become increasingly familiarized with her medicalized story. A 27-year-old G7 P1051 at 24 and 5 with PPROM 10 days ago, status post-latency antibiotics. I remain struck by how relationally distant Sarah feels. I feel inadequate to address her current isolation and unable to protect her from the future isolation that may result from either the loss of her pregnancy or prolonged NICU hospitalization. This contributes to a sense of distance between Sarah and our team. Admittedly, there is limited medical need for our presence in this waiting period. Our role requires only that we check for alarming symptoms such as labor or fundal tenderness, indicating infection. A few minutes of daily encounter that does little to mitigate her social isolation. But while our conversations are brief, we slowly get to know each other. She maintains hope as the pregnancy advances, while also sharing the waiting and unknown are challenging. Unable to control her situation or to offer any guarantee, I'm simply present to and with her, and she in turn is increasingly present with me. Gradually, she begins to invite me into her world. One day, our team shares with her that her daily non-stress test looks fine. She thanks us, and then noting that the movie that she is watching has caught my eye, she invites me to pull up a chair. While I cannot stay long, the shared silence and attention to something non-medical does seem to dissolve the shrinking distance between us. As a medical student and as a resident, it does feel strange and even wrong to rest, probably more as a resident, and watch a movie with a patient. After all, I am supposed to stay busy and productive. My presence with her did little to impact Sarah's care plan. However, as Sarah maintained a deep desire and hope for her pregnancy, it seemed like a healing took place, a healing made possible only by our ability to sit together in our shared humanity, bearing witness to the mystery and complexity within the uncertainty of her care. We are at 1 o'clock, and so I will just wrap up there and just say that the last portion of the paper, I draw out some of these themes that I had noted in the story of the Samaritan woman at the well, thinking particularly about what would it look like to think about like a well person approach to care, not like well as in wellness, but well as in like the well that we can draw water from. And then connect the themes that I noted previously in the interaction between the Samaritan woman and Jesus, themes of respect and reverence, themes of treating each other as a mean or as an end, not as a means to an end, and then mutual vulnerability between providers and patients. That there's so much more to say, but that'll be where I end for now.
Ellery, that was really beautiful, and like you've left us hanging for like the rest of the paper. So hopefully this will be an encouragement to have you work on getting that published, or otherwise so we can disseminate it in some other way, or we'll have you back to finish it. So lovely. So thanks to you all for being here. I think one of the beautiful themes that came out today from all the papers is this idea that people and creation and non-human animals and healthcare professionals and our patients are ends in themselves, never means to an end. When we have that view of everything as gift, maybe our approach and our sort of stance towards them will change, not only in society, but within medicine. So thanks you all for being here. If you have any other feedback that you wanted to share with our students or with Dr. Sarosi, please either send it to me and I can forward it to them, but we appreciate your feedback as we get everybody ready for CMR. Good to see everyone. Bye, friends.